The billionaire rejected true love for the perfect image and paid the price in front of everyone. Hey there, tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from before we start. And once the story ends, make sure to give it a score from 0 to 10. Enjoy the ride. She knew the moment she walked into that boardroom that everything was about to change. Elena Harper stood in the doorway of Prescott Industries' 32nd floor conference room, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee, one black, one with a dash of cream, exactly how Landon liked it during his morning meetings. The familiar ritual that had sustained them through 5 years of building an empire from nothing now felt strangely hollow. Elena, perfect timing, Landon said without looking up from his presentation slides, his voice carrying that new tone she'd been hearing more often lately, polished, calculated, meant for audiences rather than conversations. Everyone, this is Elena Harper, one of our closest advisors. One of our closest advisors. The words hit her like ice water. Not his partner. Not the woman who'd sat beside him at their kitchen table, mapping out business strategies on napkins when they couldn't afford proper paper. Not the person who'd held him through panic attacks when the first investor meetings fell through. An advisor. The 12 executives around the mahogany table barely glanced her way. They were too busy studying the glossy magazine spread projected on the wall, a 2-page feature from Fortune showcasing Silicon Valley's golden couple. There was Landon, sharp in his tailored suit, his arm around a stunning blonde woman whose smile could have powered the entire building. Camille Rothwell, the media heiress who'd entered their orbit 3 months ago like a perfectly orchestrated PR campaign. The public response has been overwhelmingly positive, Landon continued, clicking to the next slide. Brand recognition is up 37% since the announcement. The Rothwell family connections alone have opened doors we've been knocking on for years. Elena set his coffee down quietly beside his laptop, her fingers lingering for just a moment on the ceramic mug she'd bought him from a street vendor in Portland during their weekend getaway last spring, back when he still noticed things like her favorite coffee shops and the way she hummed while painting. The engagement announcement is scheduled for next month's Business Weekly cover story, said Miranda Walsh, their head of communications, her voice crisp with efficiency. We'll need to coordinate with Camille's team for the photo shoot. The narrative writes itself. Brilliant entrepreneur, influential socialite, the perfect power couple. Elena's breath caught. Engagement announcement. She looked at Landon, really looked at him, searching his face for any sign of the man who used to trace her fingers while she painted, who'd whispered that her art was what gave him the courage to dream bigger. But his eyes were fixed on the screen, calculating return on investment like he was discussing quarterly earnings. Questions? Landon asked the room. Elena wanted to raise her hand. She wanted to ask when exactly she'd become invisible, when their shared dreams had become his solo empire, when love had become a line item to be optimized. Instead, she picked up her purse and walked toward the door. Elena, Landon called after her, and for a split second, his voice carried an echo of the man she'd fallen in love with. Where are you going? She turned back, taking in the conference room full of strangers planning a future that didn't include her, and the man she'd given 5 years of her life to, who was looking at her like she was disrupting his carefully orchestrated performance. I'm going to let you get back to building your perfect image, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening in her chest. The elevator doors closed between them, and Elena saw her reflection in the polished steel, a woman who'd spent so long supporting someone else's vision that she'd forgotten what her own face looked like when it wasn't smiling for his benefit. 32 floors down, the city sprawled before her through the lobby's floor-to-ceiling windows. Portland seemed very far away suddenly, but maybe that was exactly where she needed to be. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, Elena pulled out her phone and did something she hadn't done in months. She deleted every photo of them together from her camera roll, not out of anger, but out of something deeper, a recognition that some stories end not with shouting matches or thrown dishes, but with the quiet understanding that you've become a stranger to the person you love most. And sometimes, the most radical thing you can do is simply disappear. The boxes in their shared apartment felt heavier than they should have. Elena sat cross-legged on their hardwood floor, surrounded by 5 years of a life she was systematically dismantling. Each item she wrapped in newspaper told a story Landon had apparently forgotten. The ceramic elephant from their first trip to San Francisco's Chinatown, the vintage camera he'd bought her for her birthday, when money was still tight, the stack of handwritten notes he used to slip under her coffee mug every morning, Your laugh is the best sound in this apartment. L. Watched you paint for an hour today. You create magic. L. Thank you for believing in us when I couldn't. L. She folded each note carefully and placed them in a small wooden box. Not to keep, but to return. Some things were too personal to throw away, too painful to hold on to. The apartment felt different now, like a stage set after the show had ended. The massive windows that once framed their morning coffee conversations now just let in harsh afternoon light that made everything look smaller, more ordinary. The kitchen island where they'd sketched business plans while she cooked dinner had become just another surface cluttered with his Wall Street journal and her art supplies that hadn't been touched in weeks. Her phone buzzed. Landon's name appeared on the screen. Where did you go? The meeting ran late. We need to talk. Elena stared at the message for a long moment, then set the phone aside without responding. What was there to say? That she'd spent the last 3 hours packing up the pieces of herself that had somehow gotten lost in his success? That she'd found 17 business cards in his jacket pocket from networking events she'd never been invited to? She pulled out her laptop and opened her banking app. The joint account they'd shared showed his latest deposits, numbers that would have made her dizzy with excitement 2 years ago. Now they just looked like proof of how far apart they'd grown. Her freelance graphic design work seemed laughably small next to his empire, but it was hers. Earned by her hands, her vision, her late nights. It would be enough to start over. The front door clicked open, and Elena's heart did that familiar flutter it had been doing for 5 years whenever Landon came home. Some reflexes died hard. Elena, his voice carried through the apartment, softer now, more like the man she remembered. Your car's in the garage. Are you here? She could hear him moving through the rooms, probably noticing the gaps where her things used to be, the empty space on the bookshelf where her art books had lived, the bare wall where her favorite painting had hung. He found her in the bedroom, sitting beside a half-packed suitcase. What are you doing? He asked, though his eyes already knew the answer. What does it look like? Elena didn't look up from folding her sweaters. The ones he used to say brought out her eyes back when he still noticed things like that. Elena, come on. If this is about the meeting today, you misunderstood. The business stuff, the PR, none of that changes us. Us. The word hung in the air like a question neither of them wanted to answer. When was the last time you asked me about my work? Elena's voice was calm, conversational, which somehow made it cut deeper. Not the design work I do for your company, my art, my paintings. Landon opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. I've been busy, but that doesn't mean... When was the last time we had dinner together? Just us. No investors, no networking, no phones on the table. Another pause. Longer this time. Elena, I'm building something here. Something that will set us up for life. Can't you see that? She finally looked up at him. This man she'd loved through poverty and panic attacks and impossible dreams. He looked exhausted, she realized. Success had carved lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when they were surviving on ramen and hope. I can see what you're building, she said quietly, but I can't see where I fit in it anymore. He stepped closer, reaching for her hand. You fit everywhere. I'm your what, Landon? Elena stood up, her voice still soft but immovable. Your advisor? Your friend? Your secret? That's not fair, isn't it? She walked to the dresser and picked up an invitation from the pile of mail, a gala next week, addressed only to him. How many events have you been to in the last 3 months where I wasn't invited? How many interviews where you forgot to mention the person who was there when you had nothing? Landon's phone buzzed. Without thinking, he glanced at it. Elena saw the moment his attention split, saw him calculate whether this conversation or that message was more important. She saw him choose. I have to take this, he said, already reaching for the phone. But we're not done talking. Elena nodded, watching him walk to the living room, his voice immediately shifting into business mode. She could hear him through the walls, discussing market projections and expansion strategies, building his empire one phone call at a time. She zipped up her suitcase and left the wooden box of love notes on his pillow. Some conversations, she realized, were already over. The interstate stretched ahead like a question Elena wasn't ready to answer. She'd been driving for 6 hours, her small Honda packed with everything that mattered. Canvases rolled in tubes, boxes of art supplies, clothes that still smelled like the lavender detergent she'd always used in their shared laundry. The GPS kept recalculating her route to Portland, but Elena had stopped listening to it somewhere outside Sacramento. She was driving by instinct now, following highway signs like breadcrumbs leading away from the life she'd built with someone who'd forgotten her name. Her phone had been buzzing incessantly for the first 3 hours. Landon's name flashing on the screen with increasing urgency. "Elena, where are you? This is insane. Come home. We can figure this out." She'd finally turned it off near Reading, and the silence felt like the first real breath she'd taken in months. The radio played soft indie rock, songs about second chances and starting over that felt like they'd been written specifically for mile marker 247 on Interstate 5. Elena found herself humming along, her voice rusty from disuse. When had she stopped singing? When had she stopped doing anything that didn't revolve around Landon's schedule? Landon's needs, Landon's empire. A road sign appeared. Rest area, 2 miles. Her back ached from sitting, and her gas tank was running low. She pulled off the highway into a small truck stop that looked like it had been forgotten by time. A single building with faded paint, and a parking lot full of 18-wheelers and road-weary travelers. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed over rows of snacks and energy drinks. Elena grabbed a coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since the Clinton administration, and found herself standing in front of a rack of postcards featuring Oregon's coastline. Rocky beaches, towering pines, lighthouses standing sentinel against gray skies. "You heading to Oregon?" asked the woman behind the counter, her voice warm with the kind of curiosity that came from seeing thousands of travelers pass through. She was maybe 60, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that had seen enough to recognize someone running from something. "Maybe," Elena said, surprised by her own honesty. "I'm not really sure where I'm going yet." The woman, her name tag read Dorothy, smiled. "Best kind of trip if you ask me. Those planned vacations never teach you anything about yourself." Elena bought the coffee and 3 postcards she'd probably never send, then walked outside to the picnic area behind the building. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that reminded her why she'd started painting in the first place. She pulled out her phone and turned it back on, watching 17 new messages flood the screen. But it wasn't just Landon anymore. "Elena, honey," Landon called. "He's worried sick. What's going on?" Her mother. "Girl, whatever happened, you know I'm here for you." Jasmine, her college roommate. "Heard you might be coming to Portland. My guest room is ready whenever you are." Nora, her cousin who'd moved to Oregon 2 years ago and kept inviting Elena to visit. Elena stared at that last message for a long time. Nora had always been the artist in the family, the one who'd chosen passion over security, who'd opened a small gallery in Portland's Alberta Arts District, and somehow made it work. They'd exchanged Christmas cards and occasional social media likes, but Elena had never taken her up on the invitation to visit. She'd been too busy building someone else's dream. Her phone rang. Landon's name appeared on the screen. For a moment, Elena's finger hovered over the answer button. Part of her wanted to hear his voice, wanted him to say something that would make this all make sense. But she could already imagine the conversation, his logical arguments, his promises to change, his inability to understand that some things couldn't be fixed with a business plan. She let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, she listened to the message. "Elena, I don't understand what's happening. I came home and you were gone. Your clothes, your art supplies, everything. I found your note and I don't know what to do with this. You said you can't see where you fit in my life anymore, but you're everything. You're the reason I could build any of this. Please call me back. Please come home." His voice broke on the last word, and Elena felt her heart crack along with it. This was the Landon she'd fallen in love with, vulnerable, uncertain, human, but it was also the Landon who only showed up when he was afraid of losing something. She deleted the message and opened her text thread with Nora. "Hey, is that guest room still available? I think I need a change of scenery." The response came back within minutes. "Always. Drive safe, cousin. Portland's going to love you." Elena looked back at the truck stop, at Dorothy visible through the windows, probably watching the next wave of travelers figure out their own destinations. She thought about the woman behind the counter who'd recognized something in her face, about the kindness of strangers who understood that sometimes the best journeys were the ones without a map. She got back in her car and pulled onto the highway, following the signs toward Oregon, toward mountains she'd never seen and a city that didn't know her as half of anyone's success story. For the first time in years, Elena Harper was driving toward something that was entirely her own. Portland welcomed her with rain that felt like forgiveness. Elena stood under the covered entrance of Nora's gallery, watching the Oregon drizzle turn the city streets into watercolor paintings. After 10 hours of driving through the night, she'd arrived at dawn to find a note taped to the glass door. Elena, gone to get coffee and croissants. Key under the blue pot. Make yourself at home. And the gallery was exactly what Elena had imagined. Exposed brick walls, polished concrete floors, and morning light filtering through tall windows that made every shadow look intentional. But it was the paintings that stopped her breath. Nora's work covered the walls in bold strokes of color that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. Abstract pieces that somehow captured the feeling of standing at the edge of the ocean, of watching storms roll across open fields, of being small and infinite at the same time. "You made it," came a voice from behind her. Elena turned to find Nora balancing a cardboard tray of coffee and a bag of pastries, her dark hair streaked with premature silver, and her clothes splattered with paint in a way that looked more like fashion than accident. She was smaller than Elena remembered, but her presence filled the space like her artwork. Bold, unapologetic, alive. "I hope you don't mind that I let myself in," Elena said, suddenly aware of how she must look after driving through the night. "Are you kidding? This is the first time in 2 years someone's been here to see my work who isn't trying to buy it for their bathroom." Nora set down the coffee and pulled Elena into a hug that smelled like turpentine and lavender. "You look like hell, by the way. When was the last time you slept?" "Yesterday feels like a different lifetime." "Good. That means you're exactly where you need to be." Nora handed her a coffee and gestured toward the back of the gallery. "Come on, let me show you the apartment. Fair warning, it's small, but it's got the best light in the building." The apartment above the gallery was a studio space with hardwood floors worn smooth by decades of artists' feet. One wall was entirely windows facing east, and Elena could imagine how the morning light would flood the room, turning it into a natural canvas. A Murphy bed was tucked against one wall, and a small kitchenette occupied the corner, but the rest of the space was open, waiting. "I used to paint up here," Nora said, following Elena's gaze around the room, "before I got successful enough to afford a bigger studio. Some of my best work happened in this space. There's something about being surrounded by your art, sleeping next to your canvases, waking up to your unfinished paintings staring at you." Elena walked to the windows and looked out at the city below. Portland was waking up, joggers appearing on the sidewalks, coffee shops rolling up their security gates, the whole city stretching into another day. It was smaller than San Francisco, quieter, more human in scale. "How long since you've painted?" Nora asked, her voice gentle but direct. "Really painted? Not just the commercial stuff?" Elena thought about it. "Maybe 8 months. There was always something else. A project for Landon's company, a networking event I needed to prepare for, some crisis that needed my attention. And now?" Elena turned back to the room, seeing it not as it was but as it could be. Easels by the windows, canvases propped against the walls, the familiar chaos of creation that she'd been missing without knowing it. "Now I don't know what I want to paint," she admitted. "For so long everything I created was filtered through what would make him proud, what would fit in his world. I'm not sure I remember what my own vision looks like anymore." Nora nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. "I went through something similar when I left my corporate job. Took me months to remember that I didn't have to justify my art to anyone, that I could paint just because I had something to say. What if I don't have anything to say anymore? Then you start with what you feel. Anger, sadness, relief, confusion. Whatever's in there, put it on canvas. The vision will come." Nora pulled out a set of keys and placed them on the kitchen counter. "This place is yours for as long as you need it. No rent, no timeline, no expectations. Just promise me you'll paint." Elena's phone buzzed. Another message from Landon. "Elena, I called your mother. She said you're in Portland. I'm flying up there tomorrow. We need to talk face to face." She stared at the message, feeling the familiar pull of his urgency, his need to control the narrative even when it was falling apart. But for the first time in months, she was standing in a space that had nothing to do with him, a room full of possibility that he'd never seen, never influenced, never optimized for his image. "Problem?" Nora asked, noticing Elena's expression. "He's coming here. Tomorrow. Do you want to see him?" Elena looked around the apartment again at the empty walls waiting for her art, at the windows that would show her a different view of the world every morning. She thought about the woman who'd driven through the night to get here, who'd chosen the unknown over the comfortable lie of staying. "I want to paint," she said finally. "Whatever he has to say, I want to have something of my own to show for the time he's been gone." Nora smiled, the kind of smile that artists gave each other when they recognized the moment inspiration returned. "Then let's get you some supplies. The art store opens in an hour, and you've got work to do. For the first time in months, Elena felt the familiar hunger that meant a painting was fighting to be born. Her hands remembered what her heart had forgotten. Elena stood before the blank canvas at 3 a.m., her fingers stained with paint for the first time in months, watching colors bleed into each other like emotions she'd been holding back for too long. The apartment was lit only by the street lamps outside and the small desk lamp she'd angled toward her easel, creating shadows that danced across the walls like memories coming alive. She'd painted for 14 hours straight. What started as a single brushstroke, angry red slashing across white, had become something she couldn't name but recognized in her bones. Abstract shapes that felt like silence, like being invisible in crowded rooms, like loving someone who only saw your reflection. The painting was raw, unfinished, nothing like the careful compositions she used to create for Landon's world. It was hers. Her phone sat face down on the kitchen counter, deliberately ignored. She knew Landon had been calling. She could feel the urgency of his messages like pressure in the air. But for the first time in years, Elena was having a conversation that didn't include him, a dialogue between her brush and the canvas that needed no translation. The door buzzer rang at 8 a.m. sharp. Elena wiped her hands on the paint-stained towel and looked down at herself. Yesterday's clothes, hair pulled back in a messy bun, paint smeared on her cheek. She looked like an artist again, and somehow that felt like armor. She pressed the intercom button. Yes? Elena, it's me. Landon's voice tired and strained through the static. Can I come up? She could see him through the window, standing on the sidewalk in his tailored coat, looking foreign against Portland's casual morning rhythm. A businessman in a city of dreamers, investment banker sharp in a place that valued authenticity over image. The gallery entrance, she said, and buzzed him in. Elena heard his footsteps on the stairs, measured and familiar. She positioned herself near her easel, not hiding behind it but standing with it, like a statement she was finally ready to make. When Landon appeared at the top of the stairs, he looked exactly like she'd expected, polished, determined, carrying the energy of someone who was used to solving problems through sheer force of will. But his eyes, when they found hers, held something she hadn't seen in months. Fear. Elena. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the space. The easel, the paint supplies scattered across every surface, the canvas that dominated the room with its urgent colors. You look different, she supplied, not moving from her position. Alive. The word came out more honest than he'd probably intended. They stood there for a moment, the awkwardness of two people who'd shared a bed for 5 years but were suddenly strangers. Elena could see him cataloging the apartment, probably calculating its square footage, wondering how she could be happy in such a small space after the luxury they'd shared. I don't understand why you left, he said finally. We had everything. We were building something incredible together. Were we? Elena gestured toward her painting. When was the last time you asked me what I was working on? Not for your company, not for your image, but for me? Landon's eyes moved to the canvas, really seeing it for the first time. Elena watched his face as he tried to process what he was looking at. The raw emotion, the unfiltered expression, the complete absence of anything that would fit in his carefully curated world. It's very, he searched for words, abstract. It's honest. Elena, if this is about Camille, about the engagement announcement, that's just business PR. It doesn't change how I feel about you. How do you feel about me, Landon? Elena's voice was steady, curious rather than accusatory. Because I'm not sure you know anymore. He stepped closer, and she could smell his cologne. Expensive, familiar, chosen by a stylist to project success and reliability. Everything about him was a conscious decision now, even the way he stood, the way he held his shoulders. I love you, he said, and she believed he meant it. I've always loved you. Do you love me, or do you love what I represented? The woman who believed in you when no one else did? The proof that you hadn't forgotten where you came from? That's not fair, isn't it? Elena picked up her brush, not to dismiss him, but to ground herself in something real. Tell me about this painting, Landon. What do you see? He looked at the canvas again, and she could see him struggling, trying to find the right answer, the one that would fix this conversation and bring her back into his orbit. I see talent, he said finally. I see someone who should be showing in galleries in New York, not hiding in Portland. Elena's heart broke a little more. Even now, even here, he couldn't see her art without calculating its market value, its potential for his image, its usefulness to his narrative. You see a commodity, she said softly. You always have. That's not true. Then tell me what this painting means to you. Not what it's worth, not where it could hang, not how it could benefit your brand. What does it say to you? Landon stared at the canvas, and Elena watched him realize that he had no answer, that somewhere in the process of building his empire, he'd lost the ability to see art as anything other than decoration, to see her as anything other than an extension of his success. Elena, please, come home with me, we can figure this out. She set down her brush and turned to face him fully. This is my home now. These are my paintings, my studio, my life, and for the first time in years I don't need anyone's permission to exist in it. The silence stretched between them like the 5 years they'd shared, and the distance they'd traveled to arrive at this moment. Him still thinking love was a negotiation, her finally understanding that it wasn't. Outside, Portland woke up to another day of possibility, while inside, two people who'd built a life together learned that sometimes love isn't enough to bridge the gap between who you were and who you've become. He left the way he did everything now, with calculated precision and unspoken disappointment. Elena watched from her window as Landon's rental car pulled away from the curb, its black exterior reflecting the gray Portland sky, like a mirror of the conversation they'd just had. He'd stayed for 2 hours, circling the same arguments, the same promises, the same fundamental inability to understand that some bridges burn not from anger, but from neglect. Before leaving, he'd placed a business card on her kitchen counter, sleek, expensive, with the logo of a prestigious New York gallery. Harrison Whitmore wants to meet with you, he'd said. He's interested in your work. I showed him some photos from your website. Elena hadn't touched the card. Now alone in the apartment that still held the ghost of his cologne, she felt the familiar weight of being managed, positioned, optimized for someone else's vision of her success. Even his attempt at support came wrapped in his world, his connections, his version of what her life should look like. Her phone buzzed. A text from Nora. Saw the fancy car. You okay? Emergency wine in the gallery fridge if needed. Elena smiled despite herself. In the span of 3 days, her cousin had offered her more genuine understanding than Landon had in months. She made her way downstairs to find Nora arranging a new piece. A sculpture made from twisted metal and sea glass that caught the afternoon light like trapped ocean waves. How bad was it? Nora asked without looking up from her work. He brought me a business card, a gallery connection in New York. Elena sank into the worn leather chair that served as Nora's office furniture. He couldn't just see my art. He had to monetize it. The classic, I'll save you by making you successful in ways I understand move. Nora straightened and brushed dust from her hands. My ex-husband used to do that. Couldn't see why I wanted to teach art to kids when I could be selling paintings to rich people. He said he loves me. I'm sure he does. But he loves his version of you more. Elena felt something release in her chest, like a breath she'd been holding for years. How do you do it? Build a life that's completely your own? Nora looked around the gallery, at the paintings that would never grace the walls of corporate offices, at the sculpture made from materials most people would consider trash, at the afternoon light that turned everything into art whether or not anyone was there to buy it. You start small, she said. You make choices that feel right instead of choices that look right. You disappoint people who were never really seeing you anyway. Through the gallery windows, Elena watched Portland's afternoon unfold. A man walking his dog, a woman reading on a park bench, a group of teenagers laughing over coffee at the cafe across the street. Normal people living normal lives that nobody was trying to turn into brand narratives. I want to show you something, Nora said, leading Elena to the back corner of the gallery, where a small painting hung, almost hidden between two larger pieces. It was a watercolor of a kitchen table, simple, domestic, beautiful in its ordinariness. 2 coffee cups, morning light, a sense of quiet intimacy that made Elena's throat tight. I painted this the day after my divorce was finalized, Nora explained. My first morning in my own apartment, my own table, my own coffee cup. Nobody telling me how to hold it or what it meant about my personal brand. Elena studied the painting, seeing not just the image but the freedom it represented. It's perfect. It's mine. That's what makes it perfect. They stood in comfortable silence, 2 women who'd chosen the harder path of authenticity over the easier one of being managed. I think I want to stay, Elena said finally. Not just for a visit. Really stay. What about your life in San Francisco? What life? Elena laughed, but it wasn't bitter anymore. Just honest. I had Landon's life. I was a supporting character in his story. I want to write my own. Nora's phone chimed with a notification, and she glanced at it briefly. Speaking of writing your own story, there's something I should tell you. I may have submitted some photos of your new painting to a local art collective. They're having a showcase next month. Emerging artists, very grassroots, nothing fancy. Nora, you didn't. I did. And they want to meet with you tomorrow. Nora grinned, unrepentant. Before you get mad, this isn't about connections or networking or building your brand. It's about your art being seen by people who care about art, not about what it can do for their image. Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Excitement that had nothing to do with Landon's approval or success. Pure, uncomplicated possibility. What if I'm not ready? What if you are? Elena looked at her hands, still stained with paint from the night before, then at the gallery around her filled with art that existed for its own sake. She thought about Landon's business card upstairs, and Harrison Whitmore's prestigious New York gallery, and the life she could have if she followed the path someone else had laid out for her. Then she thought about the watercolor of the kitchen table, and the freedom of disappointing people who were never really seeing you anyway. Okay, she said. Let's do it. For the first time in years, Elena was about to meet people who would see her art before they saw her value to someone else's empire. The coffee shop smelled like possibility and second chances. Elena sat in a corner booth at Grind Coffee, a local spot that Nora had chosen for the meeting because real artists don't do business in sterile conference rooms. The walls were covered with rotating exhibits from local creators. The furniture was mismatched but comfortable, and the entire atmosphere breathed creativity rather than corporate efficiency. She'd arrived 20 minutes early, nursing a lavender latte and trying to calm the butterflies that felt different from any nervousness she'd experienced in Landon's world. This wasn't the anxiety of being judged for how well she fit someone else's vision. This was the vulnerable excitement of showing your true self to strangers and hoping they'd understand. Elena? A voice interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see a woman about her age approaching the table, shoulder-length auburn hair, paint-stained jeans, and eyes that seemed to catalog everything in the room with an artist's attention to detail. I'm Vivian Torres, the woman said, extending her hand. And this is Marcus Webb. Marcus appeared behind Vivian, a tall, lanky man with graying temples and the kind of smile that made you feel like you'd been friends for years. His handshake was firm but brief, the gesture of someone who understood that artists often lived more in their visual world than their verbal one. Nora showed us photos of your recent work, Vivian said as they settled into the booth. We had to meet the person behind those paintings. I should warn you, Elena said, surprised by her own directness. I'm not really sure what I'm doing yet. I've been away from my art for a while. Good, Marcus said, stirring honey into his coffee. The best art comes from people who are figuring things out, not from people who think they have all the answers. Vivian pulled out her phone and scrolled to a photo. This piece, the one with the red slashes and the empty spaces. It's been haunting me since Nora sent it. There's something about the way silence takes up space in your composition. Elena looked at the image of her painting on the small screen, seeing it through someone else's eyes for the first time. I painted it after a conversation where I realized I'd become invisible to someone I loved. The collective specializes in emotional landscapes, Marcus explained. Art that maps the geography of human experience. Your work fits perfectly with what we're trying to showcase. Tell me about the collective, Elena said, leaning forward. 12 artists, all local, all committed to creating from personal truth rather than market trends, Vivian said. We do quarterly showcases, community workshops, collaborative pieces, nothing that would make us rich but everything that makes us feel alive. Elena thought about Landon's business card upstairs, about Harrison Whitmore's prestigious gallery, where her paintings would hang next to established names and price tags that represented someone else's definition of success. What's the catch? She asked. Marcus and Vivian exchanged glances, and Elena caught something passing between them, an understanding she couldn't quite read. There is one thing, Vivian said carefully. The showcase next month has a theme: recovery, art that comes from rebuilding, from finding yourself after loss, from creating something new from broken pieces. It's not required, Marcus added quickly, but if that resonates with where you are right now. Elena felt something shift inside her, like tumblers falling into place in a lock she'd been trying to open for months. Recovery, not just from her relationship with Landon, but from years of creating for someone else's approval, of filtering her vision through someone else's expectations. I'd like to be part of it, she said. Excellent. Vivian smiled, pulling out a notebook that looked like it had survived several paint fights. Now, Practical stuff. The showcase is in 3 weeks. We need 3 pieces minimum, and the opening night draws about 200 people. Artists, collectors, coffee shop philosophers, the occasional city council member who thinks supporting local art makes them look cultured. No pressure to sell, Marcus added. Some people do, some don't. The point is to be seen, to connect, to remember why we make art in the first place. Elena's phone buzzed against the table. Landon's name appeared on the screen with a message she could see without opening. Did you think about the Whitmore Gallery? He's expecting to hear from you. She turned the phone face down without reading the rest. Sorry, she said to Vivian and Marcus. Old life trying to manage new life. We've all been there, Vivian said with understanding. My ex used to critique my paintings while I was still working on them. Took me 2 years after our divorce to paint without hearing his voice in my head. The good news, Marcus said, is that voice gets quieter every time you choose your own vision over someone else's opinion. They talked for another hour about technique, inspiration, the strange alchemy of turning pain into beauty. Elena found herself laughing more than she had in months, discussing color theory and emotional composition with people who understood that art wasn't decoration, it was archaeology of the soul. As they prepared to leave, Vivian handed Elena a card, handmade paper with simple black lettering. My studio address. Come by this weekend if you want. I'd love to see what you're working on now, and I might have some ideas for the showcase pieces. Elena pocketed the card, feeling the rough texture of the handmade paper against her fingers. It was the opposite of Landon's sleek business cards, but somehow it felt more valuable. Walking back to the gallery, Elena thought about the difference between being seen and being showcased. Landon had wanted to display her like a trophy, proof of his good taste and emotional depth. The collective wanted to witness her, to let her art speak its own truth to people who were listening for authenticity rather than market value. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Landon, probably about timelines and opportunities and the limited window for making the right career moves. Elena didn't read it. For the first time in years, she was too busy planning her own future to manage someone else's expectations. The paintings grew from her pain like flowers from concrete. Elena stood back from her easel at 2 a.m., 3 weeks deep into the most honest creative work of her life. Her studio apartment had transformed into a landscape of recovery, canvases lined against every wall, paint tubes scattered across surfaces, brushes soaking in mason jars filled with turpentine that caught the streetlight like liquid amber. The 3 pieces for the showcase were nearly complete, and they told a story she'd never had the courage to paint before. The first canvas showed a woman's silhouette dissolving at the edges, becoming transparent while the world around her grew more solid, more real. Disappearing Act, she'd titled it, though the name felt inadequate for the years of small erasures it represented. The second piece was Abstract Fury, red and black paint applied with palette knives until the canvas looked like it had been wounded and was bleeding color. But at the center, impossibly delicate, was a single brush stroke of gold, hope emerging from destruction, the moment before recovery. The third painting was her masterpiece, though she'd never say that out loud. It showed a woman standing in a doorway, half her body in shadow, half in sunlight, with her hand reaching toward the light. Behind her, the shadow held the ghostly outlines of everything she was leaving: a man's profile, a city skyline, the golden chains of a life that looked perfect from the outside. Choosing the light. Her phone had been buzzing incessantly for 3 days. Landon's messages had evolved from confused to frustrated to desperately angry. The latest one, which she'd glimpsed while reaching for her coffee, read, Elena, this silence is childish. Whitmore's offer expires Friday. You're throwing away your career. She'd blocked his number after that. A soft knock at her door interrupted her assessment of the night's work. Elena glanced at the clock. 2:47 a.m. Only one person would visit at this hour. It's open, she called. Nora appeared at the top of the stairs carrying 2 cups of tea and wearing paint-splattered pajamas. Saw your lights on. Figured you might need sustenance. You're an angel. Elena accepted the tea gratefully, realizing she hadn't eaten since noon. Nora moved through the studio, studying each painting with the focused attention Elena had learned to recognize in serious artists. Her cousin didn't offer immediate praise or critique. She absorbed, processed, understood. These are extraordinary, Nora said finally, standing before choosing the light. They're going to stop people in their tracks tomorrow night. Tomorrow, the showcase opening. Elena felt her stomach flutter with anticipation and terror. What if nobody understands them? What if they're too raw, too personal? Then they're perfect. Nora settled into the window seat, cradling her tea. Art isn't supposed to be comfortable, Elena. It's supposed to be true. They sat in companionable silence, surrounded by Elena's visual autobiography. Through the windows, Portland slept quietly, and Elena felt the strange peace that came from finally being exactly where she belonged. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said. "How do you know when you've really broken free from someone? When you're not just reacting to them anymore?" Nora considered this, her gaze moving across the paintings. "When you stop checking your phone hoping they'll understand what they lost. When you create something beautiful and your first thought isn't whether they'd be proud of you." She paused, studying Elena's face. When their approval becomes irrelevant to your joy. Elena realized she hadn't thought about Landon's reaction to her paintings once during the 3 weeks of creating them. She'd painted for herself, for the story she needed to tell, for the healing that happened when truth met canvas. "I think I'm getting there," she said. "I know you are. I can see it in your work." A notification chimed on Elena's laptop, an email from Vivian about tomorrow's setup schedule. But there was another message below it, forwarded from the gallery's website contact form. Elena's blood went cold as she read the sender's name, Camille Rothwell. "Dear Elena, I hope this message finds you well. I know this might seem strange, but I wanted to reach out before Landon's and my engagement announcement goes public next week. I've seen your art, and I wanted you to know that I understand why he can't let you go. I also wanted you to know that I'm not your enemy. Would it be possible to meet? I think we have more in common than you might expect. Camille." Elena stared at the screen, trying to process the surreal reality of Landon's fiancé reaching out to her the night before her art show. "What is it?" Nora asked, noticing Elena's expression. "His fiancé wants to meet me. The media princess? What does she want?" Elena read the message again, searching for hidden meanings, manipulation, the catch that had to be there. But something in the tone felt genuine, almost vulnerable. "I don't know. But she's coming to Portland." "When?" Elena scrolled down and found the rest of the message. "I'm flying in tomorrow afternoon. I know about your showcase tomorrow night. Landon mentioned it. I'd like to attend if that's okay with you. No drama, no confrontation. I just want to understand what I'm stepping into." Nora whistled low. "That's either very brave or very calculated, or both." Elena closed the laptop and looked around her studio, at the paintings that documented her journey from erasure to visibility, from someone else's shadow to her own light. Tomorrow night, these pieces would be seen by strangers who might understand the story they told, and apparently, they'd also be seen by the woman who was about to marry the man who'd inspired them. "What are you going to do?" Nora asked. Elena stood up and walked to choosing the light, studying the figure stepping from shadow into sunshine. The woman in the painting looked fearless, certain, unafraid of what waited in the brightness ahead. "I'm going to let her come," Elena said. "And then I'm going to find out what happens when the truth meets the image." Tomorrow night, all the pieces of Elena's old life and new beginning would collide in a room full of people who believed art could change everything. She was nothing like Elena had expected. Camille Rothwell stood in front of Disappearing Act with tears streaming down her perfectly sculpted face, and Elena realized that sometimes the most dangerous thing about beautiful people was that they were still human underneath the armor. The showcase had been running for 2 hours. The converted warehouse space buzzed with the energy of Portland's art community. Collectors mixed with baristas. Established artists shared wine with college students. And everywhere Elena looked, people were having the kind of conversations that happened when art made strangers feel less alone. Elena's 3 paintings had drawn crowds all evening. She'd watched from across the room as viewers stood transfixed by the moment before recovery, as couples pointed out details in Choosing the Light, as strangers shared stories triggered by the raw honesty of her work. But when Camille walked in 20 minutes ago, the atmosphere had shifted. Not because anyone recognized her. She'd dressed down in jeans and a simple black sweater, her famous blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, but because she moved through the space like someone carrying a secret too heavy for her frame. "She's been standing there for 15 minutes, Vivian whispered, appearing beside Elena with a glass of wine. "Hasn't said a word to anyone." Elena watched Camille study her painting, noting the way the other woman's shoulders were set, the careful distance she maintained from other viewers. She looked like someone who was used to being looked at but not used to really seeing. "I should talk to her," Elena said. "You sure? Because Marcus is ready to play bouncer if needed." Elena smiled at the image of gentle Marcus trying to intimidate anyone. "I think it's okay. I think she's just Lost? Yeah. Elena crossed the room, weaving between clusters of art lovers until she stood beside Camille in front of the painting. Up close, she could see that the tears weren't just from emotion, they were from recognition. It's powerful, Camille said quietly, not looking away from the canvas. The way you painted the erasure, like someone slowly turning down the volume on your existence. You felt that, Elena said. It wasn't a question. Every day for the past 6 months. Camille finally turned to face her, and Elena saw that beneath the magazine perfect features was a woman who looked exhausted. You're Elena. I know I shouldn't be here, but I had to see these paintings for myself. Why? Camille glanced around the room, then back at the painting. Because Landon talks about you constantly. Your art, your vision, your authenticity. He's marrying me, but he's never stopped loving you. And I needed to understand what I'm competing with. The honesty hit Elena like cold water. You're not competing with me, aren't I? Camille's laugh was bitter. Do you know what he said when I asked him about these paintings? He said you were processing the transition, and that your art would be stronger for having experienced real emotion. Like our relationship ending was just material for your next creative phase. Elena felt something shift inside her, not jealousy or possessiveness, but a deep sadness for both of them. He doesn't understand art, he never did. He doesn't understand women either. Camille moved to the second painting, the moment before recovery. He thinks we're brands to be managed, stories to be optimized. Do you know he has a spreadsheet for our relationship milestones? When to announce the engagement, when to plan the wedding, when to start trying for children that will photograph well for magazine covers. Then why are you marrying him? Camille was quiet for a long moment, studying the violent reds and hopeful gold of Elena's painting. Because I thought I wanted the life he represents. The security, the status, the perfect image. My whole life, people have told me that my value is in how I look, who I marry, what I represent. Landon offered me the ultimate version of that. And now? Now I'm standing in a room full of people who make art because they have something to say, not because it will look good on their Instagram. And I'm realizing that I've never created anything in my life except photo opportunities. Elena studied Camille's profile, seeing not the media heiress or the perfect fiancé, but a woman who was having her own moment of recognition. It's not too late to start, isn't it? I'm 29 years old and I've never had a real job, never made art, never done anything that mattered to anyone except photographers and publicists. I'm 33 and I just painted my first honest paintings 3 weeks ago, Elena said. We're all recovering from something. Camille turned to look at her directly, and Elena saw something she hadn't expected. Gratitude. Can I tell you something? Camille asked. Something I've never told anyone? Elena nodded. I wanted to be a teacher. Elementary school. I got accepted to education programs at 3 universities, but my parents convinced me to study communications instead. More opportunities for someone with your advantages, they said. I haven't thought about that dream in 10 years, but standing here, looking at what you created from your pain. Camille trailed off. What? I remembered what it felt like to want something for myself instead of wanting to look good wanting something. They stood in silence. 2 women who'd been shaped by the same man's inability to see past surfaces, finding unexpected solidarity in a room full of authentic expression. What are you going to do? Elena asked. Camille looked at the third painting, choosing the light, studying the figure stepping from shadow into sunshine. I don't know yet, but I know I can't marry someone who thinks love is a performance metric. Elena felt a strange sense of completion, like the final brushstroke on a painting she'd been working on for years without knowing it. Camille? Yeah? You should try teaching. You're already good at helping people see things differently. For the first time since entering the gallery, Camille smiled. Not the practiced smile Elena had seen in magazines, but something real and uncertain and hopeful. Thank you, she said, for the art, for the conversation, for showing me what it looks like when someone chooses themselves. As Camille walked away, Elena realized that she wasn't angry or threatened or vindicated. She felt something she hadn't expected. Peace. Not because she'd won some competition, but because she'd witnessed another woman recognizing her own worth. Sometimes the greatest revenge wasn't taking something back. It was watching everyone else realize what they'd been settling for. He arrived like a storm that had been building for weeks. Elena was standing near her paintings, accepting congratulations from a collector who'd just purchased The Moment Before Recovery, when she felt the familiar shift in atmospheric pressure that meant Landon Prescott had entered a room. Even before she turned around, she could sense his presence, the way conversations paused, the way energy redirected itself toward whatever space he occupied. But when she finally looked, what she saw stopped her breath. Landon stood in the doorway of the warehouse, scanning the crowd with the desperate intensity of a man who'd lost control of his carefully constructed narrative. His usual polish was cracked, his tie loosened, his hair slightly disheveled, his eyes carrying the wild look of someone who'd driven through the night fueled by panic and caffeine. He found her across the room, and the relief that flashed across his face was so naked, so vulnerable, that Elena felt her heart break a little for both of them. "Excuse me," she said to the collector, and began moving through the crowd toward the man who'd once been the center of her universe. They met in the middle of the gallery space, in front of a sculpture made from recycled materials that somehow looked both broken and beautiful under the warehouse lights. Around them, the showcase continued, laughter and wine and the magic of art connecting strangers. But Elena felt like they were standing in the eye of a hurricane. "Elena!" Her name came out of his mouth like a prayer, like an apology, like a confession all at once. "Landon, how did you—" "Camille told me." His voice was rough, strained. "She called me 2 hours ago from the airport. She's not coming back, Elena. She ended our engagement." Elena felt the words settle between them, heavy with implication. Around them, she was dimly aware of people trying not to stare, of Nora and Vivian positioning themselves protectively nearby, of the careful way the art community was giving them space while staying alert for drama. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. "Are you?" Landon's eyes searched her face, looking for something she wasn't sure she could give him anymore. "Because I think you two planned this. I think you talked her into leaving me. We talked about choosing ourselves over being chosen by someone who sees us as accessories. That's not what I—" Landon stopped, his gaze moving past her to the wall where her 3 paintings hung. Elena watched his face as he really saw them for the first time, not as commodities or career moves, but as the raw documentation of what his love had cost her. "Disappearing act," he read aloud, staring at the painting of the woman becoming transparent. Is that how you felt? With me?" "Every day for the last year." He moved to the second painting, and Elena saw him flinch at the violent beauty of the moment before recovery. "And this? The moment I realized I had to choose between loving you and loving myself." But it was the third painting that undid him. Choosing the light showed the woman stepping from shadow into sunshine, leaving behind the ghostly outlines of everything that had looked perfect from the outside. Landon stared at it for a long moment, and Elena watched him recognize himself in the shadows. Not as a villain, but as part of a life the woman in the painting had outgrown. "You left me in the shadows," he said quietly. "I left the shadows. You chose to stay in them. Elena, I love you. I've never stopped loving you. I know." Elena's voice was steady, certain. "But you love your version of me more than you love who I actually am. You love the woman who made you feel like a good person, who validated your success, who never asked you to see her as anything other than proof of your emotional depth. That's not true, isn't it?" Elena gestured toward her paintings. "When you look at these, what do you see? Art that could hang in prestigious galleries? Proof that you supported a talented artist? Or do you see a woman documenting her own erasure at the hands of someone who claimed to love her?" Landon was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving between the paintings and Elena's face. She could see him struggling, trying to find the words that would fix this, that would bring her back into his orbit. "I see someone who's been hurt," he said finally. "Someone who needs time to heal, to remember what we had before everything got complicated. And I see someone who still thinks my pain is about him." The words hit him like a physical blow. Around them, the gallery had grown quieter, though Elena wasn't sure if it was because people were listening or because her entire world had narrowed to this conversation. "What do you want me to say?" Landon asked, his voice breaking. "That I was wrong? That I took you for granted? That I built my empire on your belief in me and then forgot to include you in the kingdom? I want you to understand that this isn't about what you did wrong. It's about who I am when I'm not trying to be perfect for you." Elena gestured around the gallery, at the community of artists who'd welcomed her, at the paintings that told her truth without apology, at the life she'd built from the pieces of herself she'd forgotten existed. "This is who I am, Landon. Not your muse, not your proof of concept, not your emotional support system. Just me, making art that matters to me, with people who see me as myself instead of as an extension of their success. I could learn," he said desperately. "I could change. We could start over." Elena looked at him, really looked, and saw the man she'd fallen in love with buried somewhere under the layers of image management and strategic thinking. She saw his fear, his genuine confusion, his love that had gotten tangled up in his need to control the narrative. "You could," she said gently, "but you'd be doing it to win me back, not because you actually want to change. And I can't be your motivation for becoming a better person anymore. That's work you have to do for yourself. So this is it? 5 years? And you're just done?" Elena took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment, the finality of what she was about to say. "I'm not done with our history. I'm not done with loving the parts of you that are real. But I'm done with disappearing so you can feel like you're seeing clearly." Landon stood there for a moment longer, and Elena could see him realize that there were no arguments left, no negotiations that would change the fundamental truth she'd just spoken. She wasn't leaving him. She had already left. This conversation was just him catching up to a decision she'd made weeks ago. "I hope you find what you're looking for," he said finally. "I already have." He nodded, looking around the gallery one more time, taking in the community she'd found, the art she'd created, the life she'd built without him. Then he turned and walked back through the crowd, past the people who were pretending not to watch, past the art that celebrated authenticity over image, out into the Portland night where his rental car waited to take him back to his empire of perfect surfaces. Elena watched him go and felt not triumph or sadness, but something simpler and more profound. Completion. She had chosen the light, and for the first time in years, she could see clearly. 2 years later, the morning light streaming through her studio windows painted everything gold. Elena stood before her easel, coffee growing cold on the windowsill, completely absorbed in the canvas that had been calling to her for weeks. This painting was different from the recovery series that had launched her career, softer somehow but no less powerful. It showed a woman dancing alone in an empty room, her arms outstretched, not in reaching for something missing, but in celebrating the space she'd claimed for herself. Joy, she would call it. Simple as that. The studio had expanded since that first night 2 years ago. What started as Nora's guest room had become Elena's sanctuary, 2 adjoining spaces above the gallery, filled with canvases in various stages of completion, natural light that changed with Portland's moods, and the comfortable chaos that came from a life lived without apology. Her phone buzzed on the paint-splattered table beside her brushes. A text from Vivian. "Gallery Quarterly wants to feature your new series on their cover. Also, the Times critic confirmed for Friday's opening. Are you nervous?" Elena smiled, wiping her hands on the rag she kept tucked in her paint-stained apron. 2 years ago, a review in the New York Times would have sent her into a spiral of anxiety about perception and reception. Now it felt like validation of something she already knew. That authenticity resonated, that truth translated, that art created from the soul found its way to people who needed to hear its message. She texted back, not nervous, excited. "This series feels like everything I've been working toward." And it did. The paintings she'd been creating over the past year, 12 pieces she was calling Reclaimed Spaces, documented not just her own journey, but the stories of women who'd chosen themselves over comfortable compromises. There was the single mother who'd left law to teach elementary school, the CEO who'd stepped down to write poetry, the society wife who'd divorced her husband and opened a food truck. Elena had met them all through the collective, through the community workshops she now taught, through the network of artists and dreamers and rebuilders that had become her chosen family. Each woman's story had become a painting, and each painting was a love letter to the courage it took to disappoint people who'd never really seen you anyway. The gallery door chimed below, and Elena heard Nora's voice greeting the first visitors of the day. The preview opening for Reclaimed Spaces was tomorrow night, but the gallery had been buzzing all week with advance interest. Elena's recovery series had sold out within 3 months of the showcase, and collectors were already inquiring about purchasing pieces from the new collection. But the money, while welcome, wasn't the point anymore. The point was the woman who'd stopped Elena outside the coffee shop last week to say that seeing Choosing the Light in a magazine had given her the courage to leave an abusive relationship. The point was the teenager who'd signed up for Elena's workshops because she wanted to learn how to paint her feelings instead of cutting them into her skin. The point was the letter she'd received from a woman in Ohio who'd started painting again at 65 after seeing Elena's work in an online gallery. Art that healed, art that connected, art that reminded people they weren't alone in their struggles or their triumphs. Elena's laptop chimed with an email notification. The sender's name made her pause. Harrison Whitmore, the prestigious New York gallery owner Landon had tried to connect her with 2 years ago. "Ms. Harper?" I've been following your work since your recovery series gained national attention. I would very much like to discuss representation and a possible solo exhibition in our Manhattan location. When might you be available for a conversation? Elena read the message twice, feeling not the rush of validation she might have expected, but a quiet amusement at timing. 2 years ago, this email would have felt like salvation, like proof that she'd finally made it. Now it felt like an interesting option among many, worth considering but not worth compromising her vision to achieve. She closed the laptop without responding and returned to her painting. The woman in the canvas was mid-twirl, caught in a moment of pure, uncomplicated joy. Her face was turned toward a window where light poured in like possibility, and her bare feet were planted firmly on wooden floors that belonged entirely to her. She wasn't dancing for an audience or performing happiness for approval. She was simply moving because the music in her soul demanded expression. A soft knock interrupted Elena's concentration. "Come in," she called, not looking away from the canvas. "I brought lunch," came a familiar voice. Elena turned to find Camille standing in the doorway, holding a bag from the Vietnamese restaurant down the street and wearing paint-stained jeans that would have horrified her stylist 2 years ago. Her hair was shorter now, more practical, and her face carried the kind of glow that came from doing work that mattered. "Perfect timing," Elena said, setting down her brush. "I was about to take a break anyway." They settled at the small table by the windows, unpacking spring rolls and pho while Portland's afternoon light shifted around them. Camille had become an unexpected but treasured friend over the past 18 months, bonding first over their shared experience of loving and leaving Landon, then over the deeper work of figuring out who they were when no one was watching. "How's the new piece coming?" Camille asked, glancing toward the easel. "Good. Different. This series feels less about recovery and more about celebration, I guess. Makes sense. You've done the hard work of healing. Now you get to enjoy being whole." Camille spoke with the authority of someone who'd done her own rebuilding. After ending her engagement, she'd moved to Portland, enrolled in an accelerated teaching program, and was now working as a second-grade teacher in one of the city's most diverse schools. She'd also started taking art classes at the community center, discovering a talent for sculpture that nobody, least of all herself, had expected. "Speaking of celebration," Camille said, pulling out her phone, "I have news." She showed Elena a photo of a small clay figure, a child with arms outstretched, face turned toward the sky, capturing the same sense of unguarded joy that Elena had been painting all morning. "Camille, this is beautiful. When did you make it?" "Last week. And here's the thing. My art teacher wants to submit it to the regional student exhibition. She thinks it has a real chance of being selected." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Not because the sculpture was technically perfect, it wasn't, but because it was so clearly made by someone who'd found her voice, her vision, her courage to create without permission. "I'm so proud of you," Elena said, meaning every word. 2 years ago I thought creativity was something other people did. Now I can't imagine not making things with my hands." They ate in comfortable silence, two women who'd traveled very different paths to arrive at the same destination, lives that belonged entirely to them. "Can I ask you something?" Camille said eventually. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd never met? If I'd married him, if you'd taken that New York gallery offer?" Elena considered this, looking out at the Portland street where artists and baristas and dreamers went about their daily business of making meaning from ordinary moments. "Sometimes," she said honestly, "but then I think about the woman I am now versus the woman I was then, and I can't imagine choosing any path that didn't lead here, even if it meant having the prestige, the money, the recognition that comes with his world, especially then." Elena gestured around her studio at the paintings that lined the walls, at the view of a city that had taught her what community looked like. "This is better than prestigious. This is real." As if summoned by their conversation, Elena's phone buzzed with a news alert. Tech billionaire Landon Prescott announces engagement to venture capitalist Rebecca Sterling. Below the headline was a photo of Landon and a woman Elena didn't recognize, polished, successful, perfectly positioned to enhance his brand. Elena showed the screen to Camille, who studied it with the detached interest of someone reading about strangers. "Think this one will work out?" Camille asked. "I think it'll work exactly as well as he wants it to," Elena said, closing the phone. "Which probably means it'll look perfect from the outside. And on the inside?" Elena thought about the man she'd loved, about his genuine capacity for affection wrapped in his need to control narratives, about the way he'd probably convince himself that this new relationship was different because he'd learned from his mistakes with them. I hope he's happy, she said, and realized she meant it. I hope they both are, but I also hope they're honest with each other about what they're building. Very mature of you. Very free of me, Elena corrected, and they both laughed. The afternoon light had shifted while they talked, painting the studio in warm amber tones that made every color more vivid, every shadow more dramatic. Elena felt the familiar pull of her canvas, the urgency that meant a painting was ready to be finished. I should get back to work, she said, and I should get back to my classroom. 27 second graders don't lesson plan themselves. Camille stood, gathering the empty containers. But Elena? Yeah? Thank you for showing me what it looks like when someone chooses themselves. I don't think I could have found my way here without seeing yours first. After Camille left, Elena returned to her easel, picking up her brush and losing herself once again in the woman who was dancing for no one but herself. The painting was almost complete. Just a few more touches of light, a suggestion of movement, the final details that would bring the figure fully to life. As she worked, Elena found herself humming, the same unconscious expression of joy she'd rediscovered in those first weeks in Portland. The sound filled the studio like music, mixing with the afternoon light and the scent of oil paints and the distant sounds of a city that had taught her what home felt like. She was happy. Not the performed happiness of someone trying to convince the world they'd made the right choices, but the quiet, unshakable contentment that came from a life lived in alignment with your truest self. Elena added one final brushstroke, a highlight that caught the light pouring through the painted window, and stepped back to admire her work. The woman in the painting danced on, arms outstretched, face radiant with the kind of joy that needed no audience, no approval, no validation beyond the simple fact of its own existence. And in her studio above a gallery in Portland, Oregon, Elena Harper smiled and began planning her next canvas. What courage taught you about love? Would you have been brave enough to choose the light over the comfortable darkness? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.